few years ago, I was teaching a Sunday school lesson, and the curriculum called for index cards to be passed out to all of the little children. Okay, this was kindergarten, lower elementary school age. So I did just that. I passed out index cards to the kids, and I had them draw their fears, their greatest fears on this index card. You know, 5-year-old, 6-year-old. And this is what I got back. Number one fear, can anybody guess? Number one fear of a, real small child? Oh, yeah, that is one. Yes, spiders. Yes, spiders is the number one fear. After that, we had, they drew zombies and werewolves. So these are the things that kids were afraid of. And we had to build a house of cards. So remember you did that when you were a little kid, maybe with a deck of cards, build a little house. And we built this house with all of these index cards, and it went up a couple of levels. And then I remember we marched around it 7 times, so we must have been teaching the Battle of Jericho. So we did that, and then all the fears came crashing down. And I remember that because I was wondering at the time, we were in Sunday school downstairs, and all the adults were upstairs in the sanctuary, and I was thinking, wouldn't this be a fun exercise in the sanctuary, right? Pass out index cards to the adults. What would they draw? What would you draw? I mean, if I passed out an index card to you right now, right here, with a crayon, what would you draw? Your fear. Maybe you draw a red pen. Yeah, because you fear Dr. Arthur's grading your sermon manuscript. Maybe you draw a $ sign because the economy, your 401k, it's volatile right now. And you're wondering, when can you really retire? And when you do retire, will you be able to do the things that you thought you'd be able to do? So you draw a $ sign. Or maybe you draw a for sale sign. Because you wonder what your next move will be like. It's frightening. You don't really know what lies ahead. So you draw a for sale sign. Maybe on your index card you draw a broken heart. You draw a broken heart because you're afraid. Your relationships haven't turned out the way you thought they would turn out. With your kids, with your parents, and it really frightens you. Or maybe you've lost a loved one through death or through divorce, and you're afraid of the future, living without that person, starting new, putting all the pieces back together. It's scary. It's frightening. Maybe on your index card, you draw 3 trisomies on chromosome 21. Because a diagnosis like Down syndrome or some other chromosomal abnormality, it scares the life out of you. What would you draw on your index card? Well, as we turn to Scripture, we meet Jairus. And he's a man, he's a dad who's afraid. He knows just what he'd draw on his index card, doesn't he? He'd draw a picture of his daughter because he fears for her life. I mean, when he thinks of that little girl, 12 years old, his heart just lights up. He pictures her playing outside with her friends, the sun glistening on her dark brown hair, bringing out these golden highlights, her smile that could light up a room. But now all that life, it's fading from her. She's dying. And if Jairus were to draw something on his index card, it would be a picture of his little girl. He loves her so much. And he's afraid that she might die. So what do we do with our fears? I mean, what do we do with those things that we've written on this index card? As believers, what else can we do but to run to Jesus? That's what we do as believers in Jesus Christ. We must run to Jesus with all of our fears. Jairus goes to Jesus, but I don't think it was as easy of a decision as we might first imagine. I mean, you read this and you think, well, of course he's going to go to Jesus. He's heard about Jesus. He knows what Jesus has done all around. Of course he's going to waste no time and go to Jesus. But there was much for Jairus to fear, even in going to Jesus. Jairus, we know, was a synagogue leader, right? He is well known in his community. People know his name. Everybody knows Jairus' name. He's respected. He has position. He has some power. He's the one who sets everything up for synagogue. Every week he makes sure everything is in order, everything is in place. He makes sure everything has been swept, that the reading that's placed in the ark of the Torah is all set. He has readers. He has someone to preach. Everybody knows Jairus. But if you look back just a little into Mark chapter 3, we see that early on in Mark's a fast-paced gospel. Early on Mark chapter 3, verse 6, we learn that the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. These are Jairus' ministry colleagues. And they're plotting a way to kill Jesus. Not only that, but later on in Mark chapter 3, verse 22, and the teachers of the law who came down from Jerusalem said, they say this about Jesus, he is possessed by Beelzebub. By the prince of demons, he is driving out demons. Wow. They said some strong things about Jesus, Jairus' colleagues. So you see how this wouldn't have been as easy a decision as we think it might be. I mean, if Jesus runs out and connects himself with Jesus, if Jairus runs out and connects himself with Jesus, he's aligning himself with Jesus, the man whom his colleagues have said should die. The man who his colleagues have said works for Satan, not God. So for Jairus to take this step of faith toward Jesus, he is risking so much, isn't he? He's putting at risk his position, really, the power that he maintains in the community. Possibly he's putting at risk his own life, depending on how far these colleagues will go. But something happens, and Jairus takes that step of faith. He makes that move toward Jesus. We're told in verse 21, when Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. We don't know what made Jairus make that move. that step toward Jesus. Maybe it was his wife who pressed him out of the house and said, honey, he's back. This is your last chance. Look at her. She doesn't have much longer left. Look at her. Please go. Please go. But whatever it is, Jairus leaves the house and he makes his way. He heads down to the lake because he needs to see Jesus. Because he does know that Jesus can help him. He knows that Jesus is the one who can help him. So he makes his way down to the lake. He stops for no one. No shaloms, no greetings. He kicks up a dust behind him, a cloud of dust behind him. Is that Jairus, the synagogue leader? He makes his way down, but Jesus is hemmed in. We're told there's a crowd that's formed around him. And Jairus wonders, how will he get in? It is urgent now. How will he get in? But with a father's love and a fearless faith, Jairus snips that hem, and the crowd unfolds like the parting of the Red Sea. And Jairus, the synagogue ruler, the man with position, the man with power, he falls at Jesus' feet. My little daughter is dying. Please come, put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live. Isn't it true that our fears can drive us to our knees? So there's Jairus, and we're just told simply in verse 24, so Jesus went with him. So simple. So Jesus went with him. All of that emotion, all of that heartache, all of that fear, in this one little step of faith toward Jesus, falling at his knees, and then all of a sudden, it's okay. So Jesus went with him. It's going to be okay. Do you know that Jesus goes with you in your fears? Do you know that he does that? Jesus goes with us in our fears. We can trust him in the midst of our fear. So, the adrenaline is slowing down in Jairus' body, and we're told that a large crowd followed and pressed around Jesus. And, well, this isn't good news for Jairus, because Jairus is bringing Jesus back to his home where his daughter is laying, dying. And, well, there's some urgency in the matter, and Jairus would like to get there quickly, but there's this crowd, and crowds slow everything down. They always do. No crowd moves quickly. And this crowd is pressing against Jesus, and Jairus, it's like, trying to pull everybody in a direction, and he just can't seem to get there. And then a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors. She'd spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. And immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. You see how Jairus is just stuck in this sort of this freeze frame, his story, just stuck, trying to move the crowd with sort of, you can picture with bewilderment on his face, wondering, you said you'd come with me. Why are we stopping? And the story stops. We're left with him just standing there. And now the story moves to this woman. She's so different from Jairus, isn't she? We don't even know her name. We're not even told her name. She has no position. She has no power in this village. Don't even know her name. Yet she comes to Jesus knowing that if she just gets a touch of him, she'll be healed. It sounds like some kind of hocus pocus magic almost, doesn't it? I'm just going to get a touch and then I'm going to sneak away into the crowd and I'm going to be okay. But Jesus tells us no. We're told that at once power went out from him. It's not hocus pocus magic. It's the power of God comes and touches this woman. And this healing doesn't happen by touch. It happens by trust. We're told later, Jesus says, your faith has healed you. It's trust. This woman receives this healing. She needs it. I think it's interesting that in Mark here, he tells us that this woman, she had tried everything to obtain healing, right? And the doctors didn't give her any help. In fact, they made things worse, is what Mark tells us. And I think it's so interesting that Luke, who was a physician, completely leaves out that detail. But Mark tells us she had tried everything. And nothing works. And here's a woman for 12 years who has suffered in this way. Imagine what she feels like every day. This kind of bleeding. Surely she's anemic. She never feels well. She has very low energy, just probably sick all the time. But on top of that, she is socially ostracized, even stigmatized. When we're stigmatized, we're known for one quality. We're reduced to one perceived negative quality. Well, she's the woman with the bleeding. She's the girl with Down syndrome. He's the divorced man. And you become stigmatized. And this woman is socially stigmatized. She's ritually, unceremonially, she's unclean, ceremonially unclean. She doesn't go to the temple and worship with everybody else. She can't. She longs to hear that priestly benediction where the priest says, "Go in peace." She knows what that means. I have peace with God. And because I have peace with God, I have peace with everybody around me. She longs to hear, "Go in peace." But she can't get that. So she comes to Jesus. She wants all of this. And just with this touch of trust, it happens. She's healed. She slinks her way back into the crowd, and this is where, had I probably put Mark together, I would have changed some things, possibly. Or if I had been in the crowd, or if I had been Jesus, I might have advised him and said, let her go, Lord. She's had it tough. She really has. Give her the healing. Just let her go back, slink back into life. But no, he stops everything. Who touched me? And the disciples say, everybody's crying. We don't know who everybody's touching you. What do you mean? No, he had realized the power had gone out from him. Verse 30. And he asked, who touched my clothes? And Jesus keeps looking around to see who had done it. He's not going to let her off the hook. So then this woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. We have to stop there for a moment. Because here we have this woman in the midst of this large crowd, and now people must be realizing at this point who she is and what has happened, and there's got to be a collective gasp and a big step backwards. Because has she just made everyone unclean around her? Surely she has made Jesus unclean. Let's give her space. But Jesus wants her here, right in the middle of it. And here she tells her whole truth To me, this sounds utterly horrifying. I mean, really, and what is the whole truth? The whole truth is what she's been through for these last 12 years. Reckless, feckless doctors chasing them all over the country. One in Capernaum sends her out into the country, says, try this salve, try this balm. One sends her into Sepphoris, down to the big city in Jerusalem. Nothing works. She's lost everything. She's depleted in every way, financially, emotionally. She's socially ostracized. She tells Jesus her whole story. And he listens to it. Every bit. It's hard to tell the whole story. I mean, the whole story, isn't it? I mean, the whole story, we always keep parts of it behind. We don't want everybody to know the whole story. I'm a mom of 4 kids, and I have to tell you, I never get the whole story. Ever. A few years ago, this was before Audrey was born, our oldest son had had some major leg surgery. And he had had his legs broken. The doctors broke both of his legs. And they had femoral anteversion, and they adjusted them, moved them back into place. He was in a wheelchair for 3 months, followed by a walker, then a cane, and walked with a limp for 6 months. He runs cross country now. He's 17. But it was tough. It was a tough time. And I remember I was pastoring a little church in Billerica, the church I was raised in. And after church, I had a Sunday school meeting. So I stayed for the Sunday school meeting. My husband, Rich, took the 3 boys out to this little strip mall. And if you know where the Burlington Mall is, you know where Mall Road is. There is a Chipotle here and a Starbucks here and a Be Good right here. And that was sort of our Sunday afternoon routine. So Rich said, all right, I'm going to go do the routine and we'll pick you up later. I said, great. So that was that. And, an hour and a half later, maybe they come over, they come back to the church. I get in the car and everybody's quiet. Now, this is unusual for 3 boys, very unusual. And I said, how's everybody doing? Fine. I got one of those, fine. And then the little one started, and you could see the other one hit him, gave him a punch. You remember that when you were a kid? With your brother in the car, your sister in the car, shh, don't, shh. And I got a lot of that. And I thought, okay. And Rich said, it's fine, nothing to worry about. And that was it. That's all I got. That was it. 9 months later, we're in the car doing the same drill, and I hear one of the boys say in the back, remember when the policeman found Timmy? And I said, what? I don't remember that. And I got more like, she doesn't know. And I said, okay, guys, the whole story. What's the story here? And it came out bit by bit. Apparently, Rich, Jack couldn't move. He had 2 broken legs. So he was in the van, sitting, couldn't move. And Rich took the middle son out, and they were going to get Chipotle over here. And they were going to go get Starbucks first, then go to Chipotle. Well, Rich had changed the plan, and Jack was in the van with the 2-year-old. The 2-year-old decided that he was going to go out and find Dad. But Jack couldn't move because he had 2 broken legs. And not only that, but I think my husband had locked the door. This came out even later. I think he had locked the door. So when you try to open the door, when it's like, everything goes off. The car alarms go off. Anyway, but Jack, poor kid, he can't wait to go to college. I don't blame him. But so, the 2-year-old, and he goes into Starbucks, and Dad isn't there. And Jack can see this from the van because they parked right in front of Starbucks. But there's a police officer in Starbucks getting his coffee. And he sees a little boy wandering around looking for his father. So the police officer brings Timothy down to Chipotle. Is there a Rich Batten here? And that's as much as I got of the story. I don't believe my husband has a record. But I don't really want to ask at this point. But the whole story, we never get the whole story. And the whole story is hard to tell, isn't it? Because it's ugly, it's messy. And here we have this woman telling the whole story. Jesus listens to the whole story. He does. Do you know that we can trust Jesus with the whole story? We can trust him with our fear. We can lay it at his feet, and we can trust him with the whole story. So we've got this woman here, and Jesus says to her, power had gone out of her, and he says to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. This is verse 34. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. This is the only time that Jesus calls a woman daughter. He reserves this special phrase for this woman who has suffered for so long. He's saying, you belong. You are family. He says, your faith has healed you. Your faith has saved you. And he pronounces the priestly blessing. He doesn't tell her, like he's told others, go back, offer a sacrifice, go back to the temple and hear the priestly blessing. He gives it himself. And you've got to imagine that Jairus, still stuck in this freeze frame, is watching this take place. And everything that he has believed about his religion is being upended. Because Jairus knows that's not what Jesus is supposed to say. She's got to go offer sacrifice. She's got to go back to the temple. You can't pronounce it. What? But Jesus, even in the midst of this great fear that Jairus has, he's teaching Jairus something about who he is. Jesus is the one, the only one, who gives peace. So, the story moves on. And we're told that while Jesus was still speaking, verse 35, some people come from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, they said. Why bother the teacher anymore? Some commentators say this can be understood, or better understood as, why did you bother with him anyway? Kind of like, what did you think he was going to do, really? Now your reputation's ruined. All that position, that power, shouldn't have gone to him, Jairus. She's dead. She's dead. And you have to imagine this man, all this fear comes back surging through his body. And he has a choice to make right here and right now. Does he go back with these men from his household and mourn his daughter? Or does he take yet again another small step toward Jesus? And Jesus says to him, overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, verse 36, don't be afraid. Just believe. And Jairus has that moment of decision where, is he really gonna believe Jesus? Is he gonna stick with him? His daughter's dead. I mean, what can he do now? What could Jesus possibly do now? But Jairus goes. He takes the step. And he lays his fear again at Jesus' feet. I have to wonder what Jairus thought in that delay. Waiting while Jesus is working with this woman who doesn't even have a name. The delay is so hard, isn't it? I mean, do you know what it's like to live in the delay when you feel like God is doing nothing in your life? Like he was doing something at some point, and then all of a sudden it seems like it just stops. Like God stops working in your life, but you look all around you and you see that he's working in everybody else's life, everybody else around you, but what? He stopped in your life. How do you keep that faith in the delay? Can you picture Jesus saying, don't be afraid, just believe? Can you imagine that while Jesus is working with everyone else but you, that in fact, there's something to be learned in the delay? When you look at him, watching, working with other people, there's something to be learned in the delay. It's true that even in the delay, we can trust Jesus. We can trust Jesus. So Jairus continues. He goes with Jesus, and Jesus calls everybody out of the house except for a few disciples and the parents here. And he heals this little girl. He raises her from the dead. Now that is something that only God can do. That is something that only Jesus can do. He raises her from the dead. Wow. You can trust Jesus that he can resurrect life. Wow. We can trust Jesus. I wonder what the next Sabbath was like. Mark doesn't tell us. But I can't help but wonder what happened the very next Sabbath. Is Jairus still in his position? Is he standing outside of the synagogue greeting people? And does somebody new come into fellowship that day? Is it perhaps this woman without a name? Does Jairus look at her? Say, I never got your name. Welcome. We're glad you're here. You belong. You know, at one point, in that freeze frame, Jairus would have looked at this woman as the reason for his daughter's death, delaying everything. But now, he can look at this woman and say, through Jesus, she's the reason for his daughter's resurrection. Wow. We can trust Jesus. Think about that fear that you've drawn on your index card. Lay it at Jesus' feet. He can handle the whole truth about it. Oh, you can tell him everything. When you feel like you're in this fear and things are just delayed, give it to Jesus. He may have something to teach you in that delay. Trust Jesus. Don't be afraid. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, we thank you that you can handle our fear. We thank you that in our fear, you take that, Lord, and you love us. You love us so much. You give us new life. You died for us. You change us, Lord. You teach us that any situation, Lord, you are with us right there in the midst of it, redeeming it and resurrecting it. We are grateful. Help us not to live in fear, Lord, but to live in faith. In Jesus' name, amen.